This is the first meeting of the Commission on Voter Confidence. And this is the organizational meeting, so if we make any news today, it'll be a mistake. But we have a lot of things to do in organization. I regret to announce that Secretary Scanlon, who was a positive guy, unfortunately tested positive for COVID. So he is not with us today. Before we get started, as I do at the Town Law Commission, I'd like to have everybody seated at the various tables identify themselves so that the people in the audience will know who we are. Start over here.
Ken Iring, Brandon, New Hampshire.
Olivia Singh from Franklin, New Hampshire.
Amanda Merrill from Durham.
Brad Cook from Manchester.
Richard Sweat from Bow.
Andrew Georgievitz from Concord.
Jim Spillane from Portsmouth.
Doug Teschner from Haverhill, New Hampshire.
Anna Faith Romano, I'm the Communications Director.
Jenny Taggart from Boston.
Tricia Fiasco, the Elections Director.
David Lang, Chief of Staff from the Secretary of State.
Bud Fitch, I'm legal counsel to the Secretary of State.
Which is a nice lead-in. Mr. Fitch is here to tell us the obligatory right to know letter. So,
I've been told to keep it very brief, but members of the commission, thank you for your service. You are an advisory committee under the Right to Know law, and as an advisory committee, you are a public body. So the general obligations of the Right to Know law apply to you, and I'm going to talk about just a few of them. One is that anytime you're going to have a meeting, you have to ask for a public notice, posted in at least 2 places, one of which is ideally on the website. My understanding is the Secretary of State staff is going to do that work on your behalf. That has been done for today's meeting. 2, the Right to Know law requires that there be minutes kept of any meeting of a public body. My understanding is that members of the Secretary of State staff are going to draft minutes for you. And just to be clear, the minutes are very summary in nature. The law requires that they include the names of members, persons appearing before the public body, and a brief description of the subject matter discussed in any final decisions. So it's a very summary list of. Bud Fitch gave a short presentation on the Right to Know. There's a sentence that satisfies the minutes requirement for my part of the presentation. We have 5 days from when you end the meeting to make at least a draft of the minutes available to the public. So there's going to be a fairly quick turnaround. One of the curious things about the Right to Know law minute requirement is that as a public body, you have to meet in a public meeting to approve the minutes and perhaps correct them. And there are very few public bodies that meet within 5 days. So the law has evolved to be that draft minutes will be prepared, the co-chairs or somebody will review the work of the secretarial staff, the staff that prepared them for you, and they'll have to become publicly available as a draft. You'll receive them, presumably review them at your next scheduled public meeting, make any corrections that you believe should be made to them, and then adopt them as the final minutes, and those final minutes will also be a public document. Probably the thing that is the strongest recommendation to you is to use prudence and caution as you communicate with each other outside of the venue of a properly noticed public meeting. You certainly can discuss how the Red Sox are doing and things unrelated to your work, but the Right to Know law prohibits any public body from a quorum of the members deliberating in non-public session, in a private session. And it is evolved over time that there's a great interest in the emails sent to and received by members of commissions such as yours and other public bodies. So first, don't say anything in an email that you don't want our colleagues here representing the media to put on their TV station or publish on the front page of their newspaper. Because even if you may be thinking about a private conversation as you're emailing one of your colleagues, the risk exists that it will be deemed to be a communication of a public body member, and the potential exists for it to be disclosed. So certainly sharing information about scheduling and that sort of thing is prudent and appropriate. Certainly commenting on the deliberations that went on or anybody that presented is something that you should think carefully about before you do that in that context. And the appropriate context for all your deliberations is in a publicly noticed meeting such as today. We will have to be making those minutes available, which probably we will do by posting on a website. And let's see, got one more point. Actually, that's the end of, I think, my very brief summary. Unless you have questions, I
Any
will
questions
let
by
you get out of
members
order.
of the commission for clarification?
Just for clarification, but if an email concerns a topic other than the schedule, and one of us responds to all, what happens at that point? Is that really the meeting? If you're talking about an idea or issue between two people, even though it is going to all 8?
So if a quorum of the body is on the email, it is at risk of being characterized in the court of law if a challenge is brought as being deliberation occurring outside of a properly noticed public meeting.
Which is improper?
Which is not proper. And a cure, however, is to, if you have that, you may get emails from the public or interested people that send you something and send it to everybody. It's certainly appropriate to put those into the record. So you can sort of bring them to the next meeting, whoever receives them, and the co-chairs can put that into the record. We received an email from Bud Fitch where he made 3 points about voter confidence. That's not improper on your behalf to receive that. You may or may not want to encourage it. You may or may not want to have a kind of a public email that's created for anybody that wants to submit something in that manner if you want to accept things submitted in that manner. Where the problems will arise is when you get into a discussion that ought to be happening here in the public view privately through emails. And the risk is one of the challenges is a state that is substantially served by private citizens in their personal capacity, as you all are doing, is that when these disputes get difficult, it sometimes means somebody looking at your personal email system and helping you through whether or not things there are disclosable ultimately could result in particularly a court in camera, not kind of in public to begin with, looking at all your emails to see whether any of them are something that should be disclosed. So it's prudent to avoid even getting close to the boundaries to ensure that you're never in a situation where your Gmail or Comcast or whatever you may have becomes the subject of litigation or concern about a violation of the right to know law.
Just a little more elaboration. So we've gone through this in Portsmouth with the city council at times. If all of us receive an email with a comment from anybody, from a citizen, member of the media, and we respond directly to that, that's between the member and the member of the public who sent it to us. But if we respond by saying reply to all, which would include all 8, it sounds like that would be improper.
You are certainly entering into a territory where somebody may assert that that's a deliberation outside. If your response is anything beyond thank you, and you do reply all, if you make any substantive comments in response, like we're concerned about that too, or we've discussed that and we'll discuss it some more, you're starting to get into a territory where if somebody carefully scrutinizes your work, they may assert that that's something that should be happening in public. And again, some of that's going to happen a little bit, and a part of the cure is to bring that onto the record at the next meeting. That's helpful, and it diminishes the risk that there'll be any negative consequence to it. But again, prudence is avoid engaging in the discussions that you're formed for anywhere except in a properly noticed public meeting. Thank you.
In that regard, if we receive phone calls from voters or citizens in the state and they want to talk about the commission's work, do those need to be brought to the record at the next subsequent meeting? How do we deal with those kinds of communications?
So as a commission, you may want to discuss amongst yourselves, part of your organization, what approach you'd like to do with that. The right to know law is about governmental records. And unless you're tape recording, which you probably shouldn't if you're a two-party state, so unless you have somebody's permission, it could be a serious problem to tape record it. That phone conversation, presumably, or grocery store conversation is not going to create a governmental record. So as a starting point, it's kind of outside of the sphere of what the right to know law covers. That said, you may want to settle on amongst yourselves whether you're going to have some documentation where you might at the next meeting say, Bud Fitch cornered me at the grocery store again, And these are the 3 points that he made to me about your work.
Any other questions for, yes, sir?
So I understand that we should reply all to emails, but if we get emails sent to the committee, since this is a committee that's set up to listen to public input, and if we don't reply at all, then it would be possibly perceived that we're not willing to listen to people who have questions and/or concerns. Would you suggest that we reply directly to them only, or that we just reply and suggest that we can't, or that we've been instructed not to respond, and that we're dealing with any issues as a committee?
So the prohibition is primarily one about deliberations occurring outside of the public eye.
Which would be reply all.
So, which would be reply all, or even reply where only certain members of the commission are getting emailed, but a sufficient number to constitute a quorum. There is a little bit of case law, it's a number of years old now, talking about communications between a legislator and their constituent, where the courts held legislators get to talk to their constituents, and I think you are somewhat similarly situated. So I think the risk involved in you receiving an email from an individual and you responding even substantively to them regarding the questions they present to you or the concerns or ideas they suggest to you, I think that's probably okay. It's, you know, you need to decide whether you're going to then bring that in, whether it's attributed to that person or it's not. Just an interested citizen brought the following concern or idea and bring it back to a commission at a subsequent meeting. But one-on-one communication between a public servant and their constituent, in most of these contexts, certainly the legislative context, the courts have said that's not subject to right to know law disclosure. It is, if you bring that email in and put it into the official record, you'll want to make judgments about which ones you do that with and which ones you don't, based on probably permission of the person you're interacting with, but also the extent to which it will be beneficial to the commission's work.
Thank you.
There are some practical exceptions to this. If you get an email that says, can you come on Tuesday? You get to answer whether you can come on Tuesday, because that's not a deliberation, that's just a scheduling. So, you know, but if it's talking about something substantive, like do we want to include X in a report, or what do you think of what Susan Cook said on Tuesday? Don't answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so just so everybody knows, Ambassador Sweat and I have decided that co-chairing a meeting is very difficult. We've decided to alternate chairing, so I am not doing all the talking to the exclusion of him today. We did it alphabetically, or he did it alphabetically. He said, you go first.
I thought I said it by seniority.
I'm not sure he'll be chairing the next meeting. Charge of the commission, Secretary Scanlon was going to charge us today and describe again, as he did at the news conference that announced the commission, what his view of the purpose is. I think you have read it. We are not here to design elections in the world. We are not here to draw congressional boundaries. We are not here to do a lot of things. We are here to listen to the public, find out what their concerns are about the conduct of elections in New Hampshire, and to try to learn and make public how elections work in New Hampshire with the view of instilling confidence in the public on how we do what we do, and to the extent we discover things that might be able to be done better, to make recommendations about that. So there is a limitation on what we're going to do. We're not probably going to analyze every bill that's been in the legislature and changing elections. As I said, we're not here to draw congressional or other boundaries. We're not here to relitigate issues that have come up in the past, but if there's a misunderstanding of them, perhaps we'll explain what's happened. And to make as public as possible the election system of New Hampshire as we have it, which the Secretary believes, and I believe, and I think a lot of people believe, will instill more confidence in it as it is understood, because there has been a lot of degradation of the popular confidence in elections, at least according to polls and according to different articles that appeared in the press. Read the editorial in the Union Leader yesterday that I thought was fairly smart, which said, good luck to the commission. We think that Scanlon has understated it. We think there's a lot of confidence in elections. I wish that were true. I hope it's true. But we're here to do what Secretary Scanlon has asked us to do. One more housekeeping item. In front of you, you have a form, Commissioners, called the RSA 15A form. It's a fairly straightforward form. Everybody that's on a board, commission, or working in state government has to prepare one of these. It's pretty easy. I file them regularly. Even lawyers can fill it out. So before you leave today, if it's possible for you to fill it out and hand it in to the staff, they would appreciate it. So that they have complied with the law. And so we'll have some time at the end to do that. So I thought we would start by, some of us know each other, some of us know each other better than others. I thought we'd start by having each member of the commission tell a little about him or herself. And then I'd like you to tell us one thing that we probably never would suspect about you. So why don't we start with the guys first?
Okay. Well, let's see. For the last 20 years, since I got back from Denmark, I have been working as a consultant in international business. I have, for the last 10 years, focused on my own original profession of architecture and am working to develop new communities in the continent, around the continent of Africa. We're working in 2 countries right now, but last summer in particular, I spent 5 weeks traveling to 7 different countries, and we are building new communities that are solar powered and sustainable design, and are utilizing agriculture as the base economic activity, but then we build out around from that. And the approach is to mimic a very successful model that was implemented in Alaska by my partner that created the Alaskan Tribal Corporations. They were the early onset of the SBA 8A program for minority-owned, women-owned small businesses. They have been very successful in Alaska, and we are trying to overcome the 50 years of inertia where over $3 trillion of investment has resulted in very little benefit to the continent. And that has proven to be a very difficult task, but very rewarding, and that's where I spend most of my time.
Something that we know about.
That I thought nobody knew much about.
Okay. You're off the hook, Commissioner. Done.
Doug Teschner, I served in the legislature here up to 20 years, but it was 20 years ago when I left. I was also a New Hampshire Assistant Secretary of State. I worked overseas a great deal. I did democracy development work in Rwanda and Morocco. I ran the Peace Corps in Ukraine the last time that Putin invaded, which is why I'm doing a lot of yellow and blue today, as well as several countries in Africa. I have my own little business doing leadership consulting, but I'm also very involved as a volunteer with a group called Braver Angels, trying to get people to talk to each other across the political divide. One thing people might not know about me is I was skiing last week in Tuckerman's Ravine. So this week, no, that was last week.
And live to tell about it. Senator Brown. Yeah, I'm surprised you. Yeah. No particular order.
Out of order here. Well, I'm following up on my legislative classmate. Doug Teschner and I started together in the House in 1988. I had always been interested in politics before that. I grew up in New Hampshire, starting in Southampton. I have to admit, I moved over the border from Massachusetts in the 4th grade. But I went to a 3-room, 8th grade school in Southampton. And then went on to Winnacunnet High School at UNH, and finally got my PhD in experimental psychology from Dartmouth. So I like to say I'm completely New Hampshire educated. Proud of
Best
that.
education in the world, a UNH education and a doctorate degree.
What's that?
Best education in the world, a UNH education and a doctorate degree.
There you go. So, yeah, for things I've done before I got legislatively or politically involved, included the teaching at the collegiate level, working with students on undergraduate research projects. I've worked for a number of nonprofits, including an arts center in Durham. But once I got corralled into running for the House in '88, I found that was the place where I wanted to really spend some time, and I did. I was there for 5 terms, mostly working on environmental and energy policy. After that, I took a break, because meanwhile, my children were getting to be an age where I couldn't really keep them with a babysitter, but I wasn't sure, I should be away so much. So I took that break and then came back to work in the House, in the majority office as a policy staff person, and then to run for the Senate, where I served for 2 terms, and where I did serve 1 term on the election law and municipal affairs committee. Since then, I've been a career volunteer, not even making $100 a year. And currently, I have a couple of other assignments. One is as Durham's representative to the new Community Power Coalition here in New Hampshire. So getting back to one of my old favorite topics. And also, I work on a couple of local projects having to do with the community reading program. I think that's enough.
So what
Right.
is it you would know?
Yeah. Well, again, I'll follow the Representative Teschner on the ski theme. I was a competitive skier as a kid. How's that?
Andrew?
My name is Andrew Georgiewicz. I'm born and raised here in Concord. Lived here my whole life. Went through the Concord school system, fantastic, NHTI, off to Arizona State. Came back to raise a family, have 1 son, 20 months old. Still having sleepless nights, but very happy to be a father. A wonderful wife, going on a 5-year anniversary this year. Very active in politics, with going to, being ground zero for politics here in New Hampshire, Concord, you get to see everybody. If you don't like to see them once, you get to see them 5 times. And if you don't have an opinion by then, you can see them a few more times. So I took that as an opportunity to get to know politicians, be on the grassroots aspect of volunteering, giving my time and talent for many candidates, starting right out of college with Mitt Romney, being field staff for him, and traveling on his advance team, and then joining up with the Trump campaign, being the deputy state director for the 2016 cycle. From that, when he became president, jumped on the advance team, traveling around the country, building events for the president. And now I work full-time for Sunbelt Rentals, renting construction equipment. So I tell people I'm just a big kid. I went from the sandbox to the sandpit, and I get to play on machinery all day long. Again, lifelong resident of Concord, still will probably stay here the rest of my life. And something going on the skiing theme, I'm a 2-time member of the Junior Olympic ski jumping team.
Thank you. Explain.
The quick story of me is that I got involved in government and politics at too young of an age, and probably stayed for too long. I ran for the New Hampshire State Legislature in 1969. I got elected at the age of 21. You had to be 21 in those days. And got elected as a Republican for my first term. That's something that most people don't know about me. I've been a lifelong Democrat otherwise. Then in 1970, I ran for the city council in Portsmouth. Got elected to that. And Brad Cook, who sits to my left, held a sign for me because we had been friends at UNH at the time. And the previous year, I had supported his race for president of the student body. Total, I've been in the House as representatives for 24 years, 12 terms. The 6 terms, 12 years, 6 years, 3 terms in the New Hampshire State Senate. The last time I served in either was about 12 years ago. As police commissioner in Portsmouth, elected to that, school board member. The other thing that maybe people don't know about me is that I was the youngest member at the time of the state legislature, the House. 10 years later, the youngest member of the state Senate. I got elected as the youngest member of the city council in Portsmouth. Got elected to the youngest member of the school board in Portsmouth. And then I grew old. That happened, it seemed, very quickly. But I'd still like to be involved at the age of 74. Because we're only on this planet for a short time. And the most important thing I think that we do is make any contribution to help others that we can. And enjoy those adventures along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy?
Olivia Zink. I live in the city of Franklin, where I serve on the city council, and also served as interim mayor last year. I'm the executive director of Open Democracy, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that works on campaign finance, voting, and redistricting. I have a daughter, and one thing you might not know about me is I love to talk.
I'm Ken Eyring, I live in Linden, New Hampshire. I'm a former chairman of the Wyndham School Board, so I'm very familiar with being able to listen to public input, making sure that we try to address everyone's concerns. I was heavily involved with Senator Bob Guida last year on Senate Bill 43, which mandated that an audit be performed on the Wyndham audit, which produced on the Wyndham election in November 2020, which produced the largest numerical discrepancy in the history of the state. I'm a co-founder of the Government Integrity Project, which is a nonpartisan group. One of the things that you may not know about me is that our group put together a list of 10 election integrity bills that we wanted to get presented to our state legislature. And multiple numbers of those bills were primarily sponsored by Democrat representatives. But all of our bills, I believe, had Republican and Democrat sponsors on it. So, that's important because you want every side of every perspective of every issue to be heard to try to address as many concerns as possible.
Something we might not know about?
Is that we worked in a nonpartisan way with Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you. I'm Brad Cook. I'm chairman of the State Ballot Law Commission, and this is why I'm here. The day after Mother's Day, a week from today, we will work at 1000 Elm Street in Manchester for 50 years. I went to work there the day the building opened. Something people might not know about me is I'm named after the town of Bradford. Where my grandparents lived when I was born, and I had been married for about a year. My wife said, "Now, you were there. Your parents were there in June. You were born." I have a wife, 3 sons, and 2 grandchildren in the last 6 months. So instead of going to New London on weekends and playing golf, I babysit. So with that, thank you all. I think we'll all get to know each other better. So I'm glad we had that opportunity. The next item on the agenda is the first scheduled, preliminary schedule of meetings, at least through July. The co-chairs and the Secretary's office put this together from the input that we got from all of you. So I'd like you to look at it for a minute. I know Jim has told me that he now has got some medical appointments on May 13th. It is not, with this kind of commission, it is not required that everybody be here every time, especially because we're going to be spending a good amount of our time listening to people. But if any of these dates is a date that turns out to have a majority that can't come or a significant number that can't come, we'll reschedule. So if you can check those, that would be helpful, and let us know. You don't have to all do it, right? You don't, everybody's second doesn't have to come out this second. I neglected to say earlier that we will be live streaming and recording these sessions, and the recordings will be available. Today's not being live streamed because of the nature of the meeting and also the logistics, but future meetings will be live streamed, and we probably will have the capacity for hybrid meetings so that people can participate and testify without driving 110 miles to say something for 5 minutes. So we'll try to do that. Any questions on the schedule before we move ahead?
I have a question. Are we planning to move around the state? Is that the intent?
Yes. Yeah,
So
but
some of these will be in the evening or
we're going to take that up in format of the meeting, but yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Same question.
Okay. Yeah, no, we intend to, which is the next item, which is format of meetings. So we hope to schedule these meetings in various places, especially the listening sessions, such as other commissions have tried to do. And when we have them in remote locations, we would probably give people a chance to come after hours so that they can come and be convenient for them. And as I said, we'll try to have some hybrid meetings when it's the public participation ones. For those of you who participated in the committee that tried to design elections in a pandemic a couple of years ago, our format will be, especially the public ones, to let everybody talk, take as long as we need, try to be respectful. If people start raising topics that are totally outside of our jurisdiction, I think they'll probably be reminded of that fact, but we want to know what people are thinking about and what they want to know about. So the places and the times will be forthcoming. Yes?
And we'll, before each meeting, 48 hours before we'll be adjourned.
Yes.
Yes.
And I was just going to add, Brad, that we are not here to debate the content of the information that people are bringing forward. We will allow for different opinions to be placed side by side, but we're mainly trying to collect information, and our report will reflect more on what that information means as we try to bolster and understand better how to increase voter confidence in the election process.
And we'll have some invited groups. That's the next topic, but we're going to have expertise. We're going to try to have a demonstration of how the mechanical ballot counting devices work, and what their characteristics are, and what the standards that have been set by the Ottawa Commission for the selection of such machines are. We have a summary of election laws, what the requirements for elections are, and a description of how elections work, with possibly with demonstrations on how they work in hand count towns and how they work in machine things. Target groups for inviting, and on your agenda you see some thoughts that occurred to us, and I have more, but we're going to invite people from small towns, big towns, cities. We're going to invite people from the North Country and from all over New Hampshire. We're going to ask people who run these elections. We have, as we noted in this conference, we have a very decentralized system that's run by all of our fellow citizens in the various towns and cities. We'll have them talk what they find to be successful, what they find to be problematic, how it works. We'll invite people from the Attorney General's office. We'll have perhaps pollsters tell us how the confidence in elections is gauged or not. We'll have educators tell us how we're succeeding or not succeeding in educating people on how the system works. We're going to invite representatives of political parties, candidates, legal women voters, open democracy, town clerks, I say. But most importantly, the public at large. What do they think? What are their concerns? Anybody who wants to talk to us is going to be invited to talk to us.
Another bit of information that I think would be useful, and it sounds pretty obvious to me, but, is to get a hold of whatever data are available on whatever kinds of actual problems have occurred in New Hampshire. I know that I agree that in general the sense is that things go smoothly in New Hampshire, but you know, we're all humans voting and working at the polls, so there are areas where we might find this particular room for improvement.
If I can respond, Mandy, I was just interested in the articles that were sent around by the staff. One of the ones from Denver, I think, was an article about Colorado's level of confidence. They classified New Hampshire as being one of the 9 least confident or least happy with voter treatment in all the elections. So I would be very curious to understand where they got that information from. That certainly wasn't what I felt and what I would get from people that I talked to. But I guess
I love that article because I thought Colorado was doing everything wrong.
So I think what you said to that regard, I think is very important that we should be looking at what's being not only done elsewhere, but written about elsewhere, because that one immediately drew a red flag to me, and I think we should have an opportunity to get some background information on that.
You know, educating on what our laws are is a very interesting process, because 2 years ago when we had a committee to figure out how to vote in the pandemic, we found out that a lot of our election laws are embedded in our Constitution. And our Constitution is way longer than the U.S. Constitution. But in one of the sections it says who can do an absentee ballot and who can't. So we can have all the ideas we want in the world on how many people should vote absentee and how easy it should be, but until we change the Constitution, it says we can do it. And that was an educational thing to me, because I hadn't realized it before that. And there's a lot of chatter, and sometimes we have to look at what the legal context is about it. So anybody has more ideas on who should be invited or what groups to meet, we're going to publicize our meetings. Just the people who come today to watch the organizational meeting, it indicates that people are hearing about what our meetings are. I heard it on the radio this morning. Any group that wants to come and talk as an organization, obviously, is invited. And individuals are invited, but we will have some invitations done.
Yeah, I don't know how far we want to get into it, but I've had the opportunity the last few years to work with Secretary of State as a consultant on the election procedure manual, including setting up meetings with moderators and clerks. And in the process, I found out there's a lot about it I didn't really know. And now there's a lot more that I do know. It's very, the way our elections are run is, I don't know if I call it complex, but there's a lot of checks and balances in there. And to what extent we as a commission would want to have a formal presentation on that and say, Bud is someone who really knows it. I'm not sure, but I pose that, and I would encourage people to look at the election procedure manual. It's really quite sophisticated with all the checks. It's complex, but it's complex for a reason. It's because of all the checks and balances that are in there. Not to say that some things couldn't be done better than other things, but I don't know if the commission wants to have quote-unquote education on that. I do think one thing I have communicated to the secretary during my times as a consultant is I think it would be helpful to have more public education on the, and this may be something we come to later, more public education on those procedures and why they're there and who runs the elections and who's elected and who isn't and all of this, all the details of that. And I just throw that out there. I'm not sure. I mean, but it's certainly something that we should take into consideration, and I would encourage everyone on the commission to delve into that election procedure manual. I think that's the one source you can look at for the details of how our elections are run.
I'd like the staff to make the election procedure manuals and the statute, the election statutes, but you know, available to the staff members.
They are available electronically if you don't want to carry a big document around, but either way.
Yes.
One thing that I'd like to see is the voting machine itself. I don't know if it falls in any categories that we got lined out, but I'd like to see if we can get either, I know we can't probably get the original manufacturer because they're probably out of business now, but the current patent holder of our current machines, I'd like to get them to come and have a public discussion on the machine itself.
No, we're planning to have a demonstration.
Perfect.
Good.
And we were planning to have a description of the instruction that all the towns and cities get, so that would be the main.
Perfect.
Maybe we could walk through the testing of how they do it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's part of the demonstration. It's quite fascinating.
I don't know how to do this one, but there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation that's out there around polling locations, times, all kinds of different things as it relates to the elections in New Hampshire. And I think if we could discuss how to combat some of the misinformation or disinformation and how you find out the correct information, I think that would be an interesting topic for us to discuss. But the other thing I wanted to ask is, we talked about if people wanted to provide in person, like come and talk to us, but is there an email address that, was it elections at the Secretary of State's office that could collect written ideas and share them with us instead of people emailing us individually?
We will send something out, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please. Other comments?
Yeah, is it useful for us to talk a little bit about what order we want to take on these public meetings? Because it seems to me that we have things like voter machine operations and the ballot law, constitutional and statutes discussion. Maybe those things would be better at the earlier stage, and the public, the time dedicated to public participation be broader as we get further into the commission. I don't know if that's something that others feel would be a useful way to order it, but it seems to me we're going to have public comment at every meeting anyway, but I think it would be good to sort of give the substantive information up front, and then maybe the meetings would be more dedicated to participation by the public at a broader sense and a longer time span towards the latter part of the commission.
What we had talked about, this is called having your discussions in public. Thought we talked about alternating between public sessions and substantive sessions, so we can get input and then address things in the input and perhaps get a guide on additional topics we need to address. So that, but certainly we should have targeted dates on different things that we present. But I personally, it's just me, hesitate to put all the public comment at the end. I think we should be getting public comment.
Oh, and I just made the comment that certainly is my understanding as well. But having said that, I think it would be good that we let a schedule of meetings be let out that indicates what the topics will be and how that will unfold as the time goes on.
And we can talk to staff about it. You and I are going to call everybody up in a minute. So we can talk to staff about what's possible, because certainly, for example, having the people who are the vendors of the machine come, that needs to be scheduled so much of their availability. So
It would seem to me it makes sense to have some portion of the meeting, even though it's, you know, a topical meeting, some portion of public comments available.
As Dick just said, we're going to have public comment at every meeting with the possible exception of this.
Did you say?
I did.
We're filling out your form. No, we are,
Okay,
no,
so,
we,
I thought you maybe sounded like we were gonna have, you know,
Well,
meetings
we're
where
gonna-
there would be listening sessions, and then there would be the meetings where.
No.
I anticipated that we would probably have one of our early meetings just be listening to what people want to talk about, but after that, it would be kind of a mixed presentation of something and then additional public.
And to that point, Mandy, I've already received a phone call from someone who was very adamant that every meeting be open to the public, and I assured that individual that that was my understanding and intention. And so,
Not to say what the law says, because we're required to have all of them.
yeah.
Okay, so we will put more flesh on the bones of the schedule dates with topics, and those will be posted on the website so people will know.
And do we have a sense of, at least for the first meeting in 2 weeks, like morning or afternoon?
No, not yet. But what is your pleasure for the meeting on the 13th, folks?
Afternoon is better for me.
Okay. Early afternoon?
Early
Late
afternoon?
Mid-afternoon?
Early afternoon is fine.
What will be the topic? Are we going to have the machine explained at that meeting? What?
The first one was going to be comment.
Oh, okay, just comment. Okay.
I wanted to suggest you go that.
I've been through that before in my life, so.
I'm sure. And then following meetings, I think that's up.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd encourage perhaps Bud to make a presentation on the procedure manual at the first meeting, perhaps.
He said maybe Bud could present on the procedure manual at the first meeting, and then we could open it to public comment. That's fine.
Good. I think that gives us a little bit.
Gives us, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just so that I capture it, like, first meeting on the 13th will be Attorney Fitch walking through the election procedure manual
And public comment.
and public comment.
Which, don't tell him he has the whole meeting.
And it'll be early afternoon.
I know.
1 o'clock, Monday afternoon, is that what everybody is referring to?
1 o'clock, okay.
That's one meeting that I'm going to miss, because I'll be out of town.
Okay, so you can't be there in 2 days.
Yeah, we have 2 people.
All right, 1 o'clock, and then we'll book a few hours for that.
Yes, well, we generally schedule the meetings to go till they're done. Especially for public comment.
Location still TBD.
Yes, location.
Can you schedule there, if that's okay, for the 13th, or we can find out then?
You can schedule there. Yeah,
You can
I
schedule
just
it.
happen to be here.
Okay, so back here on the 13th?
Yeah.
So, unless we have, say, almost double the number of these dates, then we have a sense that it means that we have to have the geographic distribution will be covered at the same time as covering the topics. So you might end up with the pollsters talking in Portsmouth and the election officials talking in Vermont, or we're going to have some of it just listening sessions in those other places.
I think your former statement's probably right. Probably schedule and have a component that's substantive and then the rest public comment. And where we're going to go, we're going to have to figure out. We're going to have to talk to staff about where they have traditionally held meetings around. So, although I think that pollsters, if we had a pollster in Durham, there are a lot of pollsters in Durham, for example. So,
And students.
yeah, that's where we're having a meeting, they'll be gone.
But I think to your point, Manny, that's a good thing for us to think about between now and the next meeting is, and we can work with some comments between the commissioners. What are the times and dates and locations and subjects that ought to be located and ought to be scheduled on that schedule going forward? As you said, we only have right now 5 dates scheduled. The sense that I'm getting from this discussion is that we're going to use easily 8 to 10 meetings.
Yeah, I thought this was probably only the first half of this.
Yeah, then that's what you did say. So
I mean, the Secretary's office has a lot of experience having meetings around the state,
Right.
at different locations, they know where the places are, and so that'll be pretty straightforward.
yeah.
We can spend some time after this meeting talking. Other thoughts on? So the next item is the scope of findings and possible report. I think the best thing we can be setting up the scope of findings and possible report is to see where we are when we're done. Because we may need a report. We'll have a report.
Yeah, I think
We'll have a report. The question is whether the report will have recommendations for changes or just a report of what we've done. But I think that we've written the report before we had the hearings, that would be the assumptions. Plus, we don't have any idea what it's going to take us. So that'll be to be determined.
Will it be unanimous agreement to the report?
Depends who votes which way.
Or will we try to build consensus?
The last time, when we had the committee on voting independent, we started out with people from very different points of view on the efficacy of mail-in voting, the means of mail-in voting, to learn more about more things that I didn't know I could about from that experience, then we can take a stick at, but they really were important to people. We were unanimous then because we listened to each other and tried to build it all into the report. But certainly, unanimity is not a requirement. If somebody disagrees with a finding, they don't certainly, just because there are a bunch of other people for something doesn't mean they have to be for it. So certainly there's no requirement. It would be great if it was unanimous, but there's no such expectation of everybody.
With respect to a report, I mean, the charge of the committee is voter confidence, which is actually a little different than voter laws or voter, I mean, I understand that they're interrelated, but I think we want to keep our eye on the prize. What is our charge? Our charge isn't necessarily, you know, we may have some electoral changes, I accept that, but I agree with that, but that's not necessarily what our charge is. Our charge is what can we do to increase voter confidence. And my own hunch is that it's probably not going to be electoral changes that are going to increase voter confidence, and what's going to increase voter confidence might probably be beyond the scope of this. I think there's some things we can do, but a lot of it comes down to trust and how 60% of people 2 generations ago said that they trust their neighbors. Now it's only 33%. We've got, in 1960, you had half the people, you had 5% of Americans said that they didn't bother their child marriage out of their political party. Today it's 50%. So there's a lot of cultural and social dimensions to this voter confidence issue that go way beyond election changes. And I think there are things that, I mean, I have some ideas as we'll go forward, but I think we have to be realistic about what we can achieve and also focus on what is really the charge of the commission.
Well, and I think the Secretary made it clear, part of what we're here for, the majority of what we're here for, is to shine light on what the processes are and what the procedures are, so people will have confidence in them and not rely on words and anything. So, I agree.
To your comment, I also agree. One of the things that I think is very important is that we not look at the commission as providing a big solution. I think rather we should identify what are the milestones or the baby steps that need to be taken to build that trust back up. And I think it'll be very important for us to hear from the public why they don't have trust, because that's what we're of those milestones. And they're going to need to be many of them, and all we can do is give advice and comment. But somehow, I think we're going to help come back to the earlier times when that trust was much higher.
And there's the famous other business. Is there any other business to come before this meeting?
How will meetings be publicized? Other
It'll
than
be on the website. I'm sure the press has been very cooperative in saying when we were meeting so far. And I'm sure there'll be press releases. We have a staff that can put out notices. And when we get the schedule, we sort of adopted a schedule. We haven't put the places and the subject matter on, but as soon as we have that, I'm sure that'll go out so people will know. There are interested people here who represent different organizations who can publicize it to their members. So,
I wondered if the link to the our commission work could be more prominently displayed on the Secretary of State's website. It seemed a bit very,
we're really good at getting at the top of the masthead. The last time it was one of us rolling, so it means that's a good idea. All right. Anybody from the public want to say anything?
Just one more thought on the website. Maybe rather than just encouraging comment, we could be more specific with our questions. For example, what is it about elections that gives you confidence or doesn't give you confidence? Or what do you think could be done in the state that would give you more confidence? Try to be maybe more precise about the questions, and we might get more useful feedback.
Yeah, something to think about. Just because we said we'd have public comment at our meetings. Anybody from the public want to say anything? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Louise Spencer from Concord. I would ask that the commission consider a question of whether you have all the right people at the table, sitting at the table to do this project, or if there are additional folks that need to be represented in order to create a report that fully would help address the issue of voter confidence in our elections. So, you know, are there people of color? Are there different socioeconomic groups? Housing insecure people, people with disabilities. It's good to take that testimony, but it's also important to have those folks at the decision-making table as you're drawing up the writing report. So I would encourage you to have that as a question on your agenda of whether you need additional members to fully meet the mandate that's been given to you by the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, everybody's favorite motion of every meeting?
Just
Yes.
just to elaborate, I think that's a very good point. It raises a question too of our mission. As I understand it, it is advisory only. We're not really doing anything to speak of as a group. We're advising the good Secretary of State, and what he does with the results of whatever our report may be, or areas of agreement, is up to him. He appointed the members of the commission, but is there a way that the commission can really more participatorily involve other members of the other people, so that we do have that kind of diversity that was just very eloquently mentioned.
Yeah, no, I'm sympathetic to that point of view too. And we've got a lot of good people here at the table, I know that. And you cannot, and we can't invite every constituency in the state, that's impossible. But I think it would be a question to reflect on. And also in terms of whatever we might suggest, if there was a little broader constituency on the commission, whether that would maybe give people more confidence in the results. I mean, I have a lot of confidence in the secretary, I have a lot of confidence in the people on this commission and our leadership, but I think it's a worthwhile point to consider.
I would agree. But I think that whatever discussion should happen sooner rather than later, of course.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm here serving at the pleasure of the Secretary of State. So if this body is going to suggest adding people to the commission, I would highly recommend that he has an involvement in that. Because we're here to serve.
We can't appoint people.
Yeah.
We didn't appoint them.
It's his
I think the
role.
discussion is to raise the issue with him and see what his thoughts are. We had this discussion at the beginning of the last commission, why people kept calling me up saying, why are you chairman? I said, because somebody appointed me.
But I do believe that one of the items on the agenda that you put down, I think, is helpful, is that, and you've stated it multiple times today, is that any group who wishes to speak with the commission is invited and welcome to do so. So I think that voices and concerns of broad diversity of people in the public, they'll have an opportunity to be heard.
Well, and I think we'll have further discussion about groups of people that we may want to specifically ask to come in a more formal way.
Yeah, and
As
then
opposed
we-
to an open invitation.
And that's a very important way to get testimony. It's just saying it's available to people to get everybody's going to show. We, 2 years ago, we had a day for the medical community, and of course that was involving the pandemic, and we had a day for political parties, and we had a day for all the ships at sea. We had a day for everybody, and it was really helpful. And it worked well. So, all good points. Yes, ma'am.
I remember the select committee and how generous the committee was in opening its door and listening so respectfully to so many of us, members of the public. And so I want to thank you in advance for your service on this commission. I know you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and it's very much appreciated the effort that you're making.
And we have to ask you to identify yourself.
Janet Ward, Kentucky, New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Before you adjourn, Mr. Chairman, staff has put together for you, each member of the committee, asking 4 different publications. So one is the election procedure manual. Another one is a copy of the New Hampshire Constitution, a copy of the New Hampshire election laws, and then the political calendar of important dates.
So be careful what you ask for.
Mr. Chairman,
And before we leave, fill out your forms.
yeah, earlier you mentioned about decorum in the meetings, and to me, that's extremely important. I mentioned that I'm involved as a volunteer with a group called Braver Angels. We have some pretty contentious debates, and we have some ground rules, which I will share with the committee that we might want to consider, either as is or in some adapted form for our sessions.
Thank you.
I've been nice to you so far.
Yeah.
I assume we're under Robert's rules.
And if you don't get along, I'll move your chairs. No, I don't think we're going to have any trouble with people getting.
Yeah.
So please fill out the form. May I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.